I have now lived in 4 different states and 2 different countries, and Spokane is up there, Spokane, Washington, as being one of the most eco-friendly places that I have lived. But it's far from perfect. Let's talk about the wasteful things that I hate about Spokane. This series started when I lived in Okinawa, Japan, and I'm like, there are some pretty wasteful things that Japan does. Maybe I should highlight them in a wasteful things I hate about Japan video. And of course I had to do it about Las Vegas. Las Vegas is so wasteful, I had to do 2 videos. And now I gotta keep the tradition going. So, we're talking about wasteful things I hate about Spokane. Let's keep the fun going though. Let us know down below the wasteful things about your city that you hate. And I will be doing one this spring, I guess next spring, about wasteful things that I hate about Ohio. That is one of the 4 places that I have lived. I grew up in Ohio, but I have never done a wasteful things I hate about Ohio because I have never lived in Ohio after creating my channel. Hello everyone, it's Emma and welcome back to my channel where I talk about all sorts of things zero waste, focusing on free, easy, and fun ways to live low waste. And I like to do fun videos like this one every now and then too. Speaking of, let's go ahead and jump right in. The first wasteful thing I hate about Spokane is little to no glass recycling. And it's really unfortunate that there's not any glass recycling because glass is really only sustainable if it's recycled. Brand new glass, way more harmful than the planet than some might think. Some might think, oh, glass is so much better than plastic. And like, sure, it's not going to break down into microplastics, it's going to eventually break back down into sand. Harvesting brand new sand to create glass is extremely harmful for the planet. So having glass recycling is one of the best ways that we can consume glass. And now I try to avoid glass because it can't be recycled easily. We do have one spot, our dumpster at work will take a glass, so we recycle our glass at work. They're okay with it, don't worry. Other than that, like the base doesn't recycle glass. I tried searching like on Google Maps and on Google for glass recycling in Spokane, and I couldn't find anything. So far the only place that I can find in Spokane that recycles is at work. If you live in Spokane, I will tell you where that is. It's a public place, so I'm sure they wouldn't mind. Why would they not recycle glass though? And that's because glass is very heavy to ship. And so it would have to be shipped to probably Boise or Seattle, which are the closest 2 major cities to here. That would be a lot of weight and therefore a lot of energy to ship it that far. And going either direction, you do have to cross a mountain range. So like a semi-full or I guess they wouldn't do a train. It would probably be a semi-full. Would consume so much fuel that they have deemed it not worthy of being recycled because of the cost and fuel usage. Like it would cost more probably to send it all the way to Seattle than it would be just to create new glass. So that's quite unfortunate about Spokane, but that's pretty common out west, out here, like in central big states like Washington, Wyoming, Montana. If you're not in like the major city in one of these states, you probably don't have glass recycling either. Next is there's not very much public transportation. It's definitely not bad. It's not the worst I've seen. I don't know. For being a pretty big city, I would expect it to be better. There's pretty consistent bus route, which is cool. What would take somebody to drive 10 or 15 minutes probably would take a bus 45 minutes to an hour. I saw this in Vegas too. And there is high-speed rail here, but it is Amtrak, meaning it's only like from city to city. The train doesn't run within Spokane. It runs from like, sorry about the helicopter, from like Spokane to Seattle or Spokane to San Francisco maybe. I'm not really sure exactly where it runs, but there's not actually a high-speed rail for the city. After living in Japan, this is something that I critique the US very harshly on because Japan does it beautifully, and Japan is older than the US. And like, I think that's one of our biggest excuses is like, oh, well, our cities are already built up for cars. Our cities are already built for this. Yeah, well, guess what was one of the oldest cities probably in the world? Tokyo. And guess who has the best public transportation I've ever seen? Tokyo. There's not an excuse, really. So it's a shame to see only buses and that the buses aren't very good. All right, moving on. There is recycling and composting curbside, but it's mostly just for houses. I have not seen, and again, I haven't really explored this much. I don't go snooping around apartment complexes and stuff, but I haven't seen recycling and composting for apartment complexes or for businesses. I think it would be really cool if businesses offered recycling bins. Some of them do, not all of them. Or if there was composting accessible for businesses as well. And maybe they do behind the scenes. But it would be cool to actually be able to like get to see that and know about it as a consumer. And this is a problem I saw in Las Vegas too. Now Las Vegas didn't compost commercially, but there was recycling curbside. And in Las Vegas, you could recycle curbside if you lived in a house. Apartment complexes didn't have recycling. So like my friend who lived in an apartment complex would have to gather her recycling and take it to work. Not actually at work. Our base in Las Vegas had a recycling center. Recycle herself. So it was her own time, her own energy going into it, which is really unfortunate, right? And it's really just showing that like have to be of a certain socioeconomic status in order to have access to recycling and composting. And that is just really unfortunate. Maybe it's because it's harder to enforce the rules in an apartment building. I doubt it. People recycle terribly in their own homes. People probably don't follow composting rules either. So like, I don't see why that would be a barrier. It would reduce the amount of trash pickups they would have to do. There's all I can see is benefits. But yeah, it's really just enforcing that you have to make a lot of money and live in a nice house, have access to this stuff, which is really unfortunate and just plays into that myth that zero waste is for the rich and is expensive and is hard. It shouldn't be. Alright, this is something I could probably make an entire video about, and maybe I will. I made a lot of regional videos when I was in Las Vegas talking about like Lake Mead and the Colorado River Basin, and maybe this is something I'll talk about now that I live in the inland Northwest, and that is dams on the rivers. Dams galore. And we'll talk about more about it, why it's a good thing in a second, but it's also a really bad thing. The direct environment. Now, it's great because they're producing hydroelectricity. It's reducing the reliance for the entire inland and Pacific Northwest on fossil fuels, which is really, really cool, but at a cost. At a pretty big cost, actually. So, salmon used to swim all the way from the Pacific Ocean to Spokane, all the way up to Canada. Like, they would go so far inland, but they can't now because of the dams. A lot of the dams were built circa 100 years ago or so, and they didn't have that in mind at the time. There was very little conservation efforts at the time, generally speaking. These dams were built and then enforced and rebuilt, and you know, they built them up even over the next few decades. And it wasn't until probably the late 1900s, 70s, 80s, 90s, when the environmental movement started, that they started to think that, oh, look at the harm we've caused to the environment and the ecosystem by removing salmon from the Spokane River, from the Columbia River, and all these other rivers in the area, because that has had an impact on bears, on the whole food chain, right? Salmon are generally considered a keystone species, meaning that if you remove them from the top of this arch, the entire ecosystem will collapse. And I'm sure this has had effects on other fish who swim up these rivers as well, but mostly for salmon. Dams greatly impact the river ecosystems. There is some good that comes out of dams. Generally speaking, there's lots of pros and cons to them, and they're not perfect, even if they do reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. Honestly, that was all I could think of for like Spokane proper. So Spokane is generally considered to be Spokane Valley, and like kind of Airway Heights. Spokane Valley, and like I guess Liberty Lake too. So Spokane itself, definitely the most eco-friendly because that's like where the city center is and everything. Spokane Valley is very it's very suburbia. So if we're considering Spokane Valley in this, we can also talk about how there's lack of bike lanes, most of the outskirts of the cities. But honestly, where are you seeing bike lanes in the suburbs of any city? Las Vegas had a few. It was nothing impressive. But yeah, generally speaking, in the suburbs, there's no bike lanes. So it really is discouraging bike usage, as well as I have noticed too, a lot of the newer houses in Spokane Valley, the entire valley here, very urban sprawl. Like, they're not really focused on apartment complexes, on making the city walkable and bikeable. They are building the city outwards and making it built for cars. So that's unfortunate as well. But all that being said, I didn't want to end this video on a bad note. Let's talk about some of the good eco things that Spokane does right. First is public recycling. I have been pretty impressed. Okay, the bar's low because Las Vegas didn't even have public trash cans, let alone public recycling. So when I saw public recycling here, I was like, that's amazing. It encourages people who are downtown, who are enjoying snacks and drinks, to still recycle their waste instead of throwing it away, as well as reducing litter and discouraging litter by having access to public trash cans. Bringing it back to the dams, the good side of the dams is that there is tons of hydroelectricity here in Spokane. But like I said, dams are great because they produce hydroelectricity and reduce our reliance on fossil fuels. I guess something else I wanted to talk about the dams is that because a lot of them were built forever ago, they weren't built with salmon in mind. So now they're adding things like salmon ladders and salmon cannons. It's exactly what it sounds like, a literal cannon that's shooting fish over the dam to still help the salmon get all the way upstream. So there are efforts in place to help the salmon that don't just destroy the dams, because the dams do good. It's very complicated, and maybe I should make a full video on it. But anyway, tons of hydroelectricity, and even as we get a little bit west of Spokane, there's a lot of wind energy as well. I'm surprised they don't do solar here because it's a pretty dry part of the state. It doesn't rain a whole lot. It doesn't even snow a whole lot down in the valley either. I'm surprised solar is not more popular. Perhaps it's just because hydro is so good that we don't even need solar here. But yeah, lots of renewable energies in the inland Northwest, and I love to see it. And now we're gonna bring it back to the bike lanes again. As I hinted at, the suburbs, and even as you get just a little far out of downtown, not very bikeable and walkable. But downtown, extremely walkable and bikeable. So much so that they took old train yards and turned them into city parks. They've reclaimed traffic bridges, like car bridges, into walking bridges. And I think that's really, really cool when cities do that. You see that a lot in Europe, and you don't see it a lot in the US. And I love to see it when it does happen. Like, this city used to be full of like this bridge, this street used to be full of cars and pollution and noise. And now it's full of trees and just people walking and having a good time. I see festivals there all the time, food trucks, so much fun. I thought it was also really cool, the pavilion where like they do music and concerts and stuff downtown. That part used to be part of a train yard as well, and actually used to be the major source of pollution for the Spokane River. They ripped that up in like 1974 and replaced it with a very green, very nice lush park. Love to see it. Downtown, there are bike lanes as well as bike trails, mostly the Centennial Trail, which goes all the way from the Idaho border to Lake Spokane. Great trail. Love the amount of bike lanes that are downtown, as well as like places to lock your bike safely. Maybe I should make a video about story time about how our bike got stolen downtown though, and some lessons we learned about how to be bikers in a busy / crime city. If you want a story time on the bike, Dan's bike, let us know. Everything has been resolved now. I talked about it a little bit on Instagram and fully on Patreon, but if you want me to post about it here, let me know. Something else that I have encountered is that every single cafe that I go to lets you use your reusable cup. Not only that, but also gives you a discount for using your reusable cup. I've also found a couple cafes here that don't upcharge for plant milks, as they should. Some of them in Seattle, when we went there a couple weeks ago, were charging 90 cents. 90 whole cents for oat milk. And again, this all comes down to subsidies. The government is subsidizing dairy, which is really unfortunate because it takes so much resources to make dairy as opposed to oat milk, almond milk, soy milk, hemp milk, whatever. Those are all so much less resource intensive. So when cafes don't upcharge for this, it encourages people to use plant milk, which is awesome. And also the discount for using a reusable cup. Love to see it. Something we noticed right away when we got here is that they charge for plastic bags. Out of habit, I'm always like, no bag please. Spokane's very divided politically. It's like very woke in a good way, but also very far right. In the first place we went to, this person goes, we don't do that commie tax here. I'm like, the commie tax? What are you talking about? He's like, yeah, our plastic bags are free. I'm like, oh, you're saying a 10-cent charge for a plastic bag to reduce pollution is communism? People were very quick to tell us that like they were anti-plastic bag tax, and I'm like, I mean, it's helping the environment, so go off. And it's free to not use a bag? Because they have that plastic bag tax, that's all of Washington, not just Spokane, it does discourage the use of plastic bags and encourage the use of reusable bags or just no bags. Like, if I walk into the store and I only need a kombucha or two, it highly discourages you from getting a bag for just 1 or 2 items. And I get some people need bags to carry stuff with like mobility issues and stuff, but if you're able-bodied, you do not need a bag to carry 1 or 2 items. So there's a lot in Japan. I was there when they introduced their plastic bag tax, and before, I literally would get cashiers bagging 1 item, and I'm like, please no bag, please no bag, please no bag, in my broken Japanese, and they like didn't understand me. And immediately after the tax went in place, if I had 1 item, they wouldn't even ask if I wanted a bag. They would just hand it to me. So like, it made a huge impact in Japan. Granted, they were very plastic obsessed. You can watch my video about why I hated wasteful things I hate about Japan, but it does work, these plastic bag taxes. And the last thing I love about Spokane is there's a refill store and bulk grocery store options with, I think there's a Winco here, as well as Huckleberries is like the local grocery store that has bulk bins. I love Huckleberries. And then the refill store, if you're local here, is Spokane Refillery. And basically you can get everything you need at one of these 2 stores in bulk. All sorts of grains, dried snacks, spices, granola, chocolate chips, nuts, peanut butter in bulk, kombucha in bulk, package free. And then the Refillery has everything from like laundry soap, shampoo, conditioner, sunscreen. They have pet shampoo. They got shampoo bars, all sorts of zero waste swaps that you might need. There you have it. All the wasteful things that I hate about Spokane, and also some awesome eco-friendly things that they are doing. Spokane is not perfect. I don't think any city in the world is perfect when it comes to zero waste, except for that zero waste city in Japan. I forget the name of it. Anyway, but I did write down more good things than bad, so I think that's pretty good. When I was talking about how eco-friendly Las Vegas is, I was really pulling teeth. And then I also made an eco-friendly things Japan does video as well. I made sister videos to both of those because I didn't want to completely bash them. Japan does a lot of eco-friendly things as well. Las Vegas is tied with San Angelo. I lived in rural West Texas for about 8 months, and they were pretty wasteful as well, but that was like the very beginning of my zero waste journey, so I didn't really look at all the aspects of it. But since I made this series, Las Vegas is easily the most wasteful. I think I would probably put Spokane a little bit above Okinawa, just because I did Okinawa specific. Okinawa was not bike or walk friendly at all. It was very rural, very plastic obsessed, and didn't compost. So like Spokane, compost. That really puts the bar up high. Anywho, let me know how wasteful your cities are down below, or some eco-friendly things that you love about your city. Help me and Dan pick a place to move to next by hyping up your eco-friendly cities. And then stay tuned again for the wasteful things I hate about Ohio. Long anticipated. I lived there for 18 years, so I have some insight about Ohio. I'll try to keep it unbiased. Next week, we are talking about some things that I no longer buy as an environmentalist, so stay tuned for that video. I haven't done one of these. Oh gosh, maybe 2020 I did this video? So I thought it was high time I do it again. Anyway, I'll see you next week, but until then, remember that your small actions make a big difference in the long run. Bye guys. 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. And now I gotta keep the tradition. And now I gotta keep the tradition. Oh, start recording. I was texting Dan about errands. Alright, now we're bringing it back. Oh my gosh. Stupid helicopter. Bye, guys. Also, something I've